And this is what happened to me. I never thought I'd be the guy whose marriage fell apart because of something that seemed straight out of a soap opera. But life's a tricky thing, and sometimes it sneaks up on you in the most unexpected ways. I guess I should start by saying that my wife, Sarah, and I were what you'd call the perfect couple in everyone's eyes. We had 2 wonderful kids, a stable life, and the kind of relationship that people admired. But perfection, I've learned, can be the best disguise for chaos. The first time I noticed a shift, it was subtle. Sarah became more distant, a little distracted, and always on her phone. At first, I chalked it up to stress from work. She had recently taken on a big project, and I thought that maybe the added pressure was affecting her. But soon, it was more than just being a little off. She started spending late nights at the office and disappearing on weekends for supposed work meetings. Then came the excuses. Excuses so flimsy that even the kids began to notice. "Why does Mom always work on Saturdays now?" my daughter Emily asked one afternoon. I didn't have an answer for her, so I brushed it off, pretending everything was fine. But inside, my stomach twisted into knots every time Sarah walked out that door with her cheerful, "Don't wait up." She'd been doing it more and more, like she couldn't wait to get away from us. I'm not proud to say this, but suspicion got the better of me. One night, after Sarah fell asleep, I took her phone and scrolled through her messages. I don't know what I was expecting to find, but what I discovered made my blood run cold. There were countless texts with someone named Jay. They started off innocently enough. A few work-related questions, some small talk. But as I scrolled up, the tone shifted. Flirty messages, inside jokes I didn't understand, and then explicit conversations that left no doubt in my mind. She was having an affair. The realization hit me like a freight train. My heart pounded in my chest, my hands trembling as I read through every word, every emoji, every declaration of how much she missed him. Jay wasn't just some colleague. He was more, a lot more. And from the way she gushed over him, he was younger, much younger. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I did something that, in retrospect, I'm ashamed of. I played along. I pretended everything was fine and continued to watch her. Each day, my anger grew, mingling with heartbreak and disbelief. How could she do this to us? To me? To our family? But the more I observed, the clearer it became. She wasn't just having an affair. She was falling in love with this guy. I needed to know who he was. I started digging through her social media, piecing together the breadcrumbs she'd left behind. And then I found him. Jake. He was exactly what I imagined. Young, in his mid-20s, cocky smile, with a life full of potential ahead of him. He was the complete opposite of me. Where I was approaching 40 and settled, he was just getting started. No kids, no mortgage, no responsibilities. Just a carefree, adventurous guy who looked at the world with wide, unburdened eyes. I became obsessed with him. I started tracking his social media, learning everything I could about this person who had somehow slithered his way into my wife's life. Felt sick, this compulsion, but I couldn't stop. I needed to understand what she saw in him that she no longer saw in me. He was everything I used to be, before the weight of life and responsibility ground me down. Before I became the stable husband, instead of the exciting lover. I wanted to confront Sarah. I rehearsed 1,000 different ways I could approach her, each one more dramatic and explosive than the last. But something held me back. It was almost like I wanted to see how far she would go, how much she would risk for this fling. It didn't take long to find out. One Friday night, she came home with a smile that I hadn't seen in years. She was practically glowing. For a moment, it made my heart ache, remembering the days when that smile used to be for me. Then the realization hit. It wasn't for me. It was for him. That night, as we lay in bed, I finally asked, "Who's Jake?" Her reaction was immediate. She went pale, eyes wide, and for the first time in our entire relationship, Sarah looked scared, truly scared. I could see her mind racing, scrambling to come up with a lie, an excuse, something to defuse the bomb I just dropped into our lives. But I didn't give her a chance. "I know everything," I said quietly. I know about the texts, the late nights, the weekends. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Then, she whispered, "It's not what you think." That sentence. It was the most ridiculous, most infuriating thing she could have said. I felt something snap inside me. "Not what I think?" I repeated, my voice low and dangerous. "I've read your messages. I've seen the pictures. You've been cheating on me for months, Sarah. With a kid." She flinched at the word kid. But I didn't care. I was beyond caring at that point. All the pain, all the anger, everything I'd been bottling up came spilling out in a torrent of accusations and recriminations. I didn't even recognize myself. I'd always been calm, rational, the peacemaker. But that night, I was a man possessed, driven mad by betrayal. She didn't try to deny it. Instead, she cried. She sobbed and begged for my forgiveness. But the more she pleaded, the more my rage grew. Because behind the tears, behind the apologies, I could see it. The love. The twisted, pathetic truth. She loved him, and that broke me more than anything else. It would have been easier if it were just a fling, a moment of weakness. But she loved him. How do you compete with that? How do you fight when the person you love is already halfway out the door, caught up in a whirlwind romance with someone who represents everything you're not? I kicked her out that night. It was probably the hardest thing I've ever done. Watching her pack a bag with shaking hands, knowing she was going straight to him. But I couldn't bear to look at her anymore. I felt like a fool. The perfect husband who never saw the cracks forming until it was too late. When she left, I thought that would be the end of it. I thought she'd be gone for good, that I could start to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. But Sarah wasn't done with me, or our family, because that's when the custody battle began. The days after Sarah left were a blur. I was drowning in a sea of paperwork, lawyer calls, and endless appointments to sort out the mess she'd left behind. Our children, Emily and Nathan, were devastated. They couldn't understand why their mom had suddenly disappeared, and I didn't have the heart to tell them the full truth. Instead, I mumbled vague excuses about grown-up problems and needing some time apart. But they weren't stupid. They knew something was terribly wrong. But as if ripping our family apart wasn't enough, Sarah had to take it a step further. She wanted custody of the kids. I couldn't believe it when I received the notice. She had barely been in contact since she'd left, only reaching out to speak to the kids here and there. And now she wanted to fight for them? The thought of her dragging our children into her twisted world with Jake made my stomach churn. I knew what it was. She was trying to create her new perfect little family. A ready-made package with a beautiful wife, 2 adorable kids, and a shiny new boyfriend. But that wasn't going to happen. The courtroom became a battleground. I sat across from her, seething, while she put on this pitiful act, crying about how she just wanted to be a good mother, how she never meant to hurt anyone. It made my skin crawl to see her play the victim, twisting the narrative to make it seem like I was the one keeping her from the kids. She even had Jake sitting there, looking all smug and supportive, like some sort of knight in shining armor rescuing the poor, mistreated woman from her terrible husband. But it wasn't that simple. It never is. Because while Sarah was busy spinning her sob story, I had my own ammunition. I'd been collecting evidence, text messages, emails, even a few photos of her and Jake that were less than flattering. I wasn't proud of stooping to that level, but I wasn't about to lose my kids without a fight. When it was my turn to speak, I laid it all out, piece by piece. The affair, the neglect, the months of lying and deception. The judge didn't look impressed by either of us. He saw through the spectacle, the he said she said drama. But in the end, it wasn't about who could throw the most dirt. It was about what was best for Emily and Nathan. And that, I knew, was staying with me. When the gavel came down, it was like the weight of the world lifted off my shoulders. I was granted primary custody, with Sarah only getting supervised visitation. The victory was bittersweet, though. I never wanted it to come to this. I never wanted to be the kind of family torn apart by lawyers and courtrooms. But there I was, the winner in a fight where nobody actually won. You'd think that would be the end, right? Sarah slinks off into the shadows with her boy toy, and I rebuild what's left of my life. But real life is never that neat. because even after the ruling, she kept pushing. She showed up at every opportunity, making scenes at school events, at soccer games, and even outside our house. She became this desperate, unhinged version of herself, refusing to let go of the fantasy she had built in her head. The kids started dreading her visits. Emily, who used to be so close to her mom, would cling to my leg every time Sarah came around. And Nathan, my sweet, innocent little boy, would just shut down, becoming this quiet, withdrawn shell of himself. It was breaking them, breaking all of us. And the worst part? Jake was still there, always lurking in the background, encouraging her. He'd post pictures of them together, smiling and happy, with captions like, "Building our dream life," or "Love can conquer all." It was like they were living in some alternate reality, one where everything they'd done didn't matter, where they could just pretend they were this happy little couple and nothing else existed. But things were far from perfect for them. One night, months after the custody battle, I got a call. It was Sarah's number, but when I picked up, it wasn't her voice I heard. It was Jake. He was frantic, slurring his words, practically shouting over the noise of traffic and chaos in the background. "You need to come get her," he yelled. I don't know what to do. My heart pounded as I tried to make sense of his rambling. He was saying something about Sarah, how she'd been drinking, how she was completely out of control. I didn't want to believe it. Sarah wasn't like that. Sure, she'd made some terrible decisions, but she wasn't reckless. She wasn't. But then I heard her, screaming in the background, cursing him, sobbing hysterically. My blood ran cold. I barely even remember the drive to their apartment. All I could think was that my kids needed their mother, no matter how much I hated her right then. They needed her to be okay. When I got there, the scene was worse than I imagined. Sarah was a mess, her hair wild, makeup smeared, clutching a half-empty bottle of something that smelled like cheap vodka. She was screaming at Jake, who stood there helplessly, hands in the air like he didn't know what to do. And maybe he didn't. Maybe he thought he could handle her, thought he could be her knight in shining armor, but he was just a kid playing house. He had no idea what he was dealing with. "Get out of here," I snapped at him. "You're not helping." To my surprise, he left without a fight, looking more relieved than anything. And that's when it hit me. The honeymoon phase was over. Whatever illusion he'd had about Sarah, about their perfect little romance, had shattered. He was out of his depth. He wasn't a savior. He was just a guy who got in over his head. I managed to calm Sarah down enough to get her to sit, to stop shouting and throwing things. For a moment, she looked up at me with those familiar eyes I used to love, and whispered, "I'm sorry." It was the first genuine apology I'd heard from her since this nightmare began, and it broke something in me, 'cause I knew deep down that she meant it. She was sorry, but sorry wasn't enough. Not anymore. "Get help," I told her softly. "For yourself. For the kids. I can't let you see them like this." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. But I didn't believe her. Not really. Because this wasn't the woman I married. This wasn't the Sarah who used to be my partner, my best friend. That Sarah was gone. Replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Someone I couldn't trust. I left her there, alone and sobbing in that empty apartment. As I drove away, I knew it wasn't over. Whatever was happening to her, whatever spiral she was caught in, was only going to get worse. And I was right, because that night was just the beginning of Sarah's downfall. After that chaotic night, things took a turn I never expected. Sarah seemed to vanish. She stopped showing up at the kids' events, stopped trying to fight me for more visitation. It was almost eerie, like she'd just given up. Part of me felt a sense of relief. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd taken my advice and was getting help somewhere. But a part of me, the part that had known Sarah for years, knew it couldn't be that simple. I stayed on edge for weeks, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Then, one morning, I got a text from an unknown number. It was a single image. Sarah, looking pale and gaunt, sitting on the steps of some dingy-looking building. Her clothes were disheveled, and her eyes, they looked empty, like the light had gone out of her. Beneath the picture was a short message. Thought you should know where she's at. I stared at the screen, heart racing. Who sent this? And where was she? Against my better judgment, I started digging around. I knew it was dangerous to get pulled back into her mess, but I couldn't just let it go. The kids deserved to know where their mother was, to have some closure. So I started calling around, reaching out to old friends, even a few of her estranged family members. But nobody knew anything. It was like she'd fallen off the face of the earth. That is, until I found someone who did. It was Jake. I never thought I'd willingly speak to him again, but I didn't have much of a choice. When I finally tracked him down, he looked just as messed up as Sarah did in that photo. Maybe worse. His hair was greasy and unkempt, and his eyes had a wild, haunted look. It was clear the situation had spiraled out of his control. She's not okay, man, he stammered, rubbing his face. She started getting into some bad stuff after that night. What kind of stuff? I demanded, feeling the knot in my stomach tighten. Drugs. Pills mostly. But it's worse than that. He hesitated, glancing around nervously. She's been hanging around some dangerous people. I tried to get her to stop, but she just kept pushing me away, saying I didn't understand. My head spun. Drugs? Sarah had never been into that. She barely even drank before all of this. How had things gone so wrong so fast? Where is she? I asked quietly, gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles turned white. Jake looked away, shame flickering across his face. She's living with some guy in a really bad part of town. I haven't been there in weeks. She doesn't want me around. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Give me the address. He hesitated again, but after a long moment, he scribbled it down on a piece of paper. As I took it, I felt a strange mix of anger and pity for him. He'd been a part of this disaster, yes, but he was just a kid in over his head. In a way, he was a victim too, of his own poor choices and Sarah's manipulation. I thanked him curtly and left, determined to find out for myself what had become of her. The place was worse than I'd imagined. A run-down, almost abandoned-looking apartment complex on the outskirts of town, with broken windows and graffiti covering the walls. I could barely breathe as I climbed the stairs, each step feeling like it was pulling me deeper into some surreal nightmare. When I finally reached her door and knocked, it swung open on its own. The sight that greeted me made my blood run cold. Sarah was sprawled on the floor, surrounded by empty bottles and crumpled pill packets. She looked like a ghost of her former self, her skin pale and clammy, her eyes glazed over. She didn't even react when I called her name, just stared blankly at the ceiling. Panic surged through me, and I rushed to her side, shaking her gently. Sarah, wake up, I shouted, my voice echoing through the empty apartment. She blinked slowly, her gaze shifting to me with a dazed, almost confused expression. Wah! What are you doing here? She mumbled, her words slurred and barely coherent. I felt a wave of rage and grief wash over me. How had she let herself get like this? How had it come to this? I'm here to help you, I said firmly, lifting her up into a sitting position. But you need to want to get better, Sarah. This isn't you. Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the woman I used to know. I messed up, she whispered, her voice cracking. I lost everything. The kids. It's all gone. My heart ached as I held her, feeling her fragile frame tremble. I wanted to scream at her, to demand why she'd thrown everything away. But I didn't, because deep down I already knew the answer. She was lost. Lost in her own pain, her own mistakes, and now in the mess she'd made of her life. You didn't lose everything, I murmured softly. The kids still need you. They still want their mom. But even as I said it, I knew it was a lie. The kids were scared of her now. They barely remembered the good times, the happy moments. All they saw was the chaos she'd brought into their lives. I can't go back, she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. They hate me. You hate me. I don't hate you, Sarah, I said quietly, feeling my own tears burn behind my eyes. I hate what you did. I hate what this has done to our family. But I don't hate you. For a long time we just sat there, both of us broken in our own ways. And as much as I wanted to take her hand and pull her out of the darkness, I knew I couldn't. She had to want it for herself. She had to choose to get better. I'll help you get into a program, I said finally, pulling out my phone. Rehab, therapy, whatever it takes. She nodded slowly, her eyes still red and puffy. Okay, she whispered. Okay. But as I looked around the wreckage of her life, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was already too late. Too late for us. Too late for her. And even if she did get better, would we ever be able to put the pieces back together? That was a question I didn't have an answer to. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly hopeless. Over the next few weeks, I arranged for Sarah to enter a rehab facility. It was a grueling process. Lots of phone calls, paperwork, and difficult conversations. It felt surreal, like I was setting up arrangements for a stranger rather than the woman I'd spent over a decade of my life with. The facility I chose was a good one, private, secure, and known for its success rates. Part of me hoped it would be the miracle she needed to pull herself back from the brink. But then again, miracles were in short supply these days. I kept it all from the kids as best as I could, telling them only that their mom was getting some help. I didn't have the heart to explain what kind of help she really needed. They were already so fragile, so confused about everything that had happened. Jamie, my youngest, kept asking when Mommy would come back home, her little face full of hope and innocence. When she's feeling better, sweetie? I would say, forcing a smile. When she's ready. Felt like a lie every time. I didn't know if Sarah would ever be ready to come back. I didn't know if we'd ever get back even a semblance of the life we once had. The first few weeks at the facility seemed promising. I'd get updates from the staff, short reports saying Sarah was attending her sessions, responding to treatment, showing signs of improvement. I even visited a few times. She looked healthier, more stable. But there was still something missing. A spark, a sign that she truly wanted to change. It was like she was going through the motions, doing what everyone else expected of her without really committing to it. One day, a few months in, I got a call from the rehab center. "Mr. Morgan?" A woman's voice asked hesitantly. "We need to talk about your wife." My stomach dropped. "What happened? Is she okay?" "She's physically fine," the woman said slowly. "But I think it would be best if you came down here." When I arrived, the counselor took me to a small office and closed the door behind us. Sarah sat across the table, her shoulders slumped, eyes downcast. She looked defeated. The counselor, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Lewis, sighed and placed a stack of papers in front of me. "I'm afraid Sarah's not been entirely forthcoming during her time here," she said gently. I frowned, glancing at Sarah. "What does that mean?" Dr. Lewis folded her hands. "It means that despite her initial progress, we've discovered that she's been contacting people from her old life, specifically individuals who were involved in her substance abuse. It's a violation of our policy, and it indicates that she might not be fully committed to the recovery process." I felt my heart sink. "You mean she's been sneaking around using again?" "Not exactly," Dr. Lewis said carefully. "But she's been flirting with danger. We found a phone she wasn't supposed to have, hidden in her room. She's been talking to someone almost daily. When confronted, she claimed it was just for emotional support. But she trailed off, and I turned my gaze to Sarah, anger and frustration bubbling up inside me. "Who have you been talking to?" I demanded, my voice low. Sarah shifted uncomfortably, refusing to meet my eyes. It's no one. Just a friend." "A friend?" I echoed, incredulous. "After everything? After what happened to our family, to you, too?" I broke off, shaking my head. "Are you serious right now, Sarah?" "It's not what you think," she snapped, suddenly defensive. "I needed someone to talk to. Someone who understands." "Who?" I demanded again, leaning forward. "Who is this person?" She bit her lip, glancing at Dr. Lewis as if searching for support. But the counselor remained silent, her expression neutral. Finally, Sarah mumbled a name that made my blood run cold. Jake. Jake. That name again. The same guy who had thrown our lives into chaos. The same guy I thought she'd cut ties with. You're still talking to him? I practically shouted, my fists clenched. After everything he did? After what you both? It's not like that, she insisted, her eyes wide. He's the only one who doesn't judge me. Okay? He listens. He cares. He's toxic, Sarah. I exploded, feeling my control slip. He's part of the reason you ended up here in the first place. He doesn't care about you. He cares about keeping you in his orbit, dragging you down with him. Sarah shrank back, tears spilling down her cheeks. You don't understand, she whispered brokenly. You've never understood. He's the only one who. Enough, I interrupted, my voice flat. I turned to Dr. Lewis, who was watching the exchange with a concerned frown. What are my options here? She sighed softly. Unfortunately, this behavior suggests that Sarah isn't ready to fully engage with the recovery process. We can keep her here, but if she's unwilling to cooperate, there's only so much we can do. And if she leaves? I asked quietly, dreading the answer. If she leaves against our advice, she'll be on her own. We can't legally hold her if she chooses to go. I swallowed hard, looking back at Sarah. She was crying openly now, her face crumpled in misery. But I couldn't afford to let myself be swayed by her tears. Not this time. So what do you want to do, Sarah? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. Do you want to get better? Or do you want to keep running back to the person who helped destroy your life? For a long moment, she didn't respond. Then, slowly, she raised her head and looked at me, really looked at me. There was a hollow emptiness in her gaze that sent a shiver down my spine. I don't know, she whispered brokenly. My heart ached as I stood up, feeling the weight of it all pressing down on me. I wanted to scream at her, to shake her, to beg her to fight. But I couldn't do any of that. I couldn't save her from herself. Then there's nothing more I can do, I said softly. If you're not willing to choose yourself, I can't choose for you. And with that, I turned and walked out, leaving her sobbing in that tiny room. That night, I sat alone in my car outside the facility for hours, staring blankly at the dashboard. I'd never felt so helpless in my life. It was like watching someone you love drown, knowing they're only a few feet away from the shore, but they refused to swim. I wanted to be the man who pulled her out, who saved her. But the truth was, I was just another bystander, watching as she slipped beneath the waves. For the first time, I realized I might have to let her go. Really let her go. And that thought hurt more than anything else ever could. I didn't hear much from Sarah for a while after that. She stayed at the facility for a few more weeks. But when I got the call from Dr. Lewis saying that she had checked herself out against their advice, I knew what was coming. I'd been bracing for it, but that didn't make it any easier. She moved in with Jake, of course. That much I learned through fragmented sources. A mutual friend who felt compelled to tell me. A glimpse of a social media post she hadn't blocked me from yet. It was like a cruel punchline to a joke that had gone on far too long. Part of me wanted to drive over there, to shake some sense into her, to tell her that she was throwing away the last chance she had to rebuild her life. But I didn't, because I knew it wouldn't matter. Sarah had made her choice, and now I had to make mine. For the first time, I accepted that our marriage was truly over. There was no going back, no salvaging the wreckage. The woman I had loved for so many years was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. So I filed for divorce. The paperwork felt like the final nail in the coffin. I read through each page mechanically, scanning the legal jargon that reduced our life together to a series of bullet points and clauses. Custody, visitation, assets, debts. It was all there in black and white, stark and emotionless. But as much as it hurt, I knew it was the right thing to do. Sarah wasn't capable of being a partner or even a parent right now. She was too lost, too broken. When she finally got served, she didn't even fight it. There were no angry calls, no tearful pleas to reconsider. Just silence. I think that hurt more than any argument would have. It was as if she had already washed her hands of our family, as if she had already moved on to the next chapter of her life without us. The kids took it hard. Jamie, especially. She couldn't understand why her mommy wasn't coming back. "Did I do something wrong, Daddy?" she would ask, her big eyes full of confusion and pain. "No, sweetheart," I would tell her, pulling her into a tight hug. "It's not your fault. Mommy's just sick. She needs to be somewhere else right now." "But why?" she would press, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Why doesn't she want to come home?" What could I say to that? How could I explain that their mother had chosen addiction, chosen a younger man, chosen chaos and self-destruction over them? Over us? Couldn't. So I would just hold her until she cried herself to sleep, my own heart breaking a little more each time. For a while, I threw myself into being the best father I could be. I made breakfast every morning, packed lunches, helped with homework. I tried to be present, to be enough for them in a way I hadn't been before. But it was exhausting. There were days when I would put them to bed and then just collapse on the couch, staring blankly at the wall, too numb to even cry. And all the while, Sarah was out there, living whatever twisted version of freedom she thought she wanted. Occasionally, I'd hear whispers. Someone would mention seeing her at a bar, looking haggard and unsteady, or they'd mention a new tattoo or some reckless stunt she'd pulled. But I forced myself to let it go, to not care, to focus on what mattered, my kids, my own healing. Then, one day, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Hello," I said cautiously. There was a pause, and then a rough, slurred voice came through the line. "Hey man, it's Jake." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you want?" I asked sharply, already regretting answering. It's Sarah," he muttered. He sounded different, scared, almost. She's not doing so good." A surge of anger shot through me. "No kidding," I snapped. "And whose fault is that?" Jake exhaled shakily. "Look, I know you hate me, okay? I know I'm the bad guy, but I'm telling you, man, you need to come get her. She's out of control." My grip tightened on the phone. "What the hell are you talking about?" "She's been using again," he admitted, his voice low and urgent. "Like bad. I tried to help, but she won't listen. I don't know what to do, man. She's gonna kill herself if she keeps this up." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to tilt around me, my vision narrowing. "You think I can help?" I ground out. "You think I have any control over her? You're the one who—" I know," he interrupted, his tone desperate. "But I'm telling you, I can't handle this. She needs someone who actually cares." I almost laughed at the irony. This was the guy who had blown up my life, who had stolen my wife and turned her into a shadow of herself. And now he was calling me to clean up the mess? "Why are you even calling me?" I demanded, my voice shaking with rage. "You're the one who wanted her. You deal with it." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, quietly, he said something that stunned me. "Because I'm not sure she'll make it through the night." My heart stopped. Everything inside me went cold. "What do you mean?" I whispered. "She's talking crazy, man," he whispered, saying stuff about ending it all. She's got a bottle of pills. And I don't think she's bluffing." Panic flooded my veins. "Where are you?" Jake rattled off an address, somewhere on the other side of town. Without thinking, I grabbed my keys and ran out the door, my mind racing. I shouldn't have cared. I should have let him deal with it. But no matter how much she had hurt me, no matter how much damage she had done, couldn't let her die. I couldn't let the mother of my children destroy herself like this. I drove like a madman, barely aware of the traffic lights or the honking horns. All I could think about was getting to her before it was too late. The house Jake had given me was a rundown duplex in a sketchy part of town, the kind of place where dreams came to die. I banged on the door, my heart pounding. Jake answered, looking pale and strung out. He stepped aside silently, and I pushed past him, scanning the small, cluttered living room. Then I saw her. Sarah was curled up on the couch, her hair a tangled mess, her eyes glassy and vacant. An open bottle of pills lay on the table beside her, along with an empty bottle of vodka. My stomach twisted as I rushed over, shaking her gently. "Sarah?" I murmured, my voice cracking. "Sarah? Can you hear me?" She blinked up at me slowly, as if trying to focus. "Matt?" she slurred, her words thick and sluggish. What are you doing here?" "I'm here to take you home," I whispered, tears filling my eyes. "Please, Sarah, just come home." For a moment, something flickered in her gaze. A brief flash of recognition, of sorrow. But then it was gone, replaced by a dull emptiness. "Home?" she echoed softly. "I don't have a home." My heart shattered. But I wouldn't give up. Not yet. "Then we'll make one," I promised, my voice fierce. "But you have to live, Sarah. You have to fight." I held my breath, waiting, wondering if there was still enough of her left to choose life. And then, slowly, she reached out and took my hand. The decision to take Sarah home wasn't one I made lightly. In fact, it might have been the most difficult one of my life. I knew what it would mean, what it would cost me emotionally to let her back into my world. But when I looked into her hollow eyes, saw the fragility there, I knew I didn't have a choice. She was teetering on the edge of a cliff, and if I didn't try to pull her back, she'd disappear forever. Jake didn't argue. He just watched silently as I helped her to her feet. His shoulders slumped in defeat. Part of me wanted to lash out at him, to make him understand just how deeply he had destroyed everything. But I could see it in his face, he already knew. So I turned away, supporting Sarah as we made our way to the car. The drive home was painfully silent. She stared out the window, her face blank, her body slouched as if even holding herself upright was too much effort. I kept glancing at her, trying to find some trace of the woman I used to know. But she was gone, buried beneath layers of addiction and regret. When we got home, I led her inside and settled her on the couch. The kids were staying with my parents that night, so at least I didn't have to worry about explaining why their mother was back, looking like a ghost of herself. For now, it was just us. I sat down across from her, my heart heavy. "Sarah," I began softly, "we need to talk about what's going to happen next." She didn't respond, just kept staring at her hands, her fingers trembling slightly. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "I'm not going to lie to you," I continued, choosing my words carefully. "Things can't go back to the way they were. I can't just pretend everything's okay. What you did, it hurt us. It hurt me, and it's going to take a long time to heal." Her gaze flicked up to mine for a brief second, then darted away again. I pressed on. "But I'm not giving up on you. I'm going to help you, Sarah. For the kids, for what we used to be. But you have to want it. You have to try. If you don't, if you're not willing to put in the work, I can't save you." She swallowed hard, a small, desperate sound escaping her throat. I don't know if I can," she whispered, her voice so faint I almost missed it. I've messed up so bad, Matt. I don't even know who I am anymore." Hearing her admit that shook me. It was the first honest thing she'd said in a long time, and it gave me a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a part of her that wanted to be found. "We'll figure it out," I said gently. "But first, you need to get clean. You need help, real help. Rehab, counseling, whatever it takes." Her expression tightened, a flash of fear crossing her face. "Rehab?" she echoed, shaking her head slightly. I can't, Matt. You can," I interrupted firmly. "And you will, because if you don't, you're going to lose everything. Do you understand that? This is your last chance, Sarah. I can't keep doing this." For a moment, I thought she was going to argue, to fall back into her old patterns of denial and deflection. But then she sagged, the fight draining out of her. "Okay," she murmured, almost inaudibly. "Okay. I'll do it." Relief washed over me, so intense it was almost painful. But I knew this was just the beginning. Saying yes was easy. Following through would be the true test. The next morning, I called Dr. Lewis and arranged for Sarah to be admitted to a long-term residential treatment center. It was expensive, more than I could really afford, but I didn't care. If this was what it took to save her, to save our family, I would find a way. We drove there together, neither of us speaking much, the air between us tense and heavy. When we arrived, I walked her inside, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Hope, fear, resentment, exhaustion. She looked around the facility with wide eyes, her face pale. "I'm scared, Matt," she whispered as we stood in the entryway, her hand gripping mine tightly. What if I can't do it?" I turned to her, meeting her gaze squarely. "You can," I said quietly but firmly. "But you have to want it. No one else can make this decision for you." She swallowed, nodding slowly. "Okay," she murmured, her voice trembling. "I'll try." And with that, she turned and followed the intake nurse down the hallway, disappearing from view. I stood there for a long time, staring after her, wondering if I'd ever see her again. The real her. The woman I had married, the woman I had loved. The weeks that followed were a blur. I focused on the kids, on work, on keeping our lives moving forward. I didn't visit Sarah at first. I needed time to rebuild some sort of emotional barrier between us, to figure out what I even felt anymore. But I stayed in contact with her counselor, checking in on her progress, hoping against hope that this time would be different. And slowly it was. The updates I received were cautiously optimistic. Sarah was attending her sessions, participating in group therapy, even starting to open up about her feelings. It wasn't a miraculous transformation. There were setbacks, moments where she nearly gave up. But each time she pulled herself back. Each time she chose to keep going. After 2 months, I took the kids to see her. They were nervous, fidgeting anxiously as we waited in the visiting room. But when Sarah walked in, looking healthier than I'd seen her in years, their faces lit up. "Mommy!" Jamie cried, running forward to throw herself into Sarah's arms. Sarah knelt down, hugging them both tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, my babies," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I've missed you so much." I stood back, watching them, my heart aching. There was still so much pain between us, so many wounds that hadn't even begun to heal. But in that moment, I saw a glimpse of hope, a glimmer of the family we used to be. Over the next few months, I visited more frequently. Sarah and I really talked about everything that had happened, about where things had gone wrong. There were no easy answers, no quick fixes. But she was trying, and that was more than I dared to hope for. When she finally completed the program and came home, it was like welcoming a stranger. We both knew there was no going back to the way things were. Our marriage was over. But we had a new purpose now. Co-parenting, rebuilding a stable life for our kids. So we started over, not as husband and wife, but as two people trying to do right by their children. It wasn't perfect. There were still hard days, moments when the anger and resentment threatened to pull us under. But each time we chose to keep moving forward. And little by little we began to heal. Together but separate. Relearning how to live, how to hope, how to forgive. It would never be the same. But for the first time in a long time I could see a future, a real future for all of us. Sarah's affair had shattered our family. But maybe, just maybe, we could still piece together something new. Something worth fighting for.